Blood never belongs on a fence post. Not here, where a man might spend half his life and the land awakens slowly and peacefully, attempting to forget the world that broke him. However, Caleb Thorne was stopped in the middle of his ride that morning when he noticed a stripe of dark red drying under the rising sun. He reined in his horse and gazed. The world around him was silent, nothing but wind brushing through sagebrush and the soft groan of his saddle leather. At 52, Caleb had been shaped by years of intense sun and solitude. 12 years living alone on this patch of dirt had made him into a man who liked his routine simple and his company non-existent. Yet here he was looking at blood that had no place being there. He slid off his horse, boots falling on dry earth with a dull thud. The blood trail ran towards the remote length of his field, the area folks never crossed unless they were lost or desperate. Caleb followed it, gun slung in his hand, each step throwing up small clouds of dust. Then he noticed her. A young woman was partially obscured by dense grass as she lay crumpled next to the fence line. Her face was covered in mud, her clothes was ripped, and her breathing was irregular and short, as if she had been running for longer than her body could sustain. Her side, where blood had seeped through the fabric, was grasped by one hand. The other trailed feebly over the floor, as though she was still attempting to crawl in her last moments. Caleb approached her slow, careful. The manner a guy approaches a wounded animal that might yet bite from fear alone. The eyelids flickered. When they opened, he observed green, pain-clouded eyes and eyes that observed him with the keen intuition of someone who had been hunted. He knelt beside her. His shadow dropped across her face and she flinched yet shadows worried her more than sunlight ever could. When she tried to speak, her first breath cracked. The second carried a murmur that he hardly heard. "Please don't take me back." The word struck Caleb in a certain spot. His thoughts had long since turned to stone. He have heard dread before. He had heard lies, desperation, and every explanation a man could imagine. But this voice was not lying. It was imploring. It was broken. He peered across the vast land, scanning the distant hills. This type of fear was not isolated. There were cyclists behind it. Men who would follow blood until the trail ended. Did I end one way or another? Caleb glanced down at her once again, taking in the quivering in her fingers. The dirt adhered to her perspiration, and the sheer willpower it must have taken for her to get to his farm in the first place. He had no knowledge of her. Oh, he did not need to. Some dangers you hear coming, some dangers you feel, and some perils arrive in the appearance of a stranger collapsed at your doorstep. The question now was easy. What force could drive a young woman this far into the bush, leaving blood on a fence post that had not seen problems in more than a decade? Caleb Thorne raised the young woman in his arms, careful not to press on the cut at her side. She was lighter than he imagined. The kind of light that results from traveling too far, eating too little, and experiencing too much dread. As he carried her towards the cabin that had been his sole companion for 12 arduous years, her breath lightly touched his shirt. Inside he laid her gently on the little cot near the window. The cabin smelt like dry cowboy love stories, wood, old tobacco, and the faint trace of coffee that had sat on the stove since DONT was the smell of a quiet existence, a life that was being torn open again in ways he had never prepared for. Caleb fetched a basin of water, tore a strip off a clean cloth, and uncorked a small bottle of whiskey that had been meant for cold evenings and old memories. He cleansed the dirt from her wound, watching the way her jaw contracted with pain. She did not cry out. That told him a lot on its own. Her eyes were still rimmed with fatigue, but they were clearer than before when she eventually opened them again. For a moment, she simply watched him, trying to decide if he was danger or deliverance. Caleb kept working in solitude. Talking too soon never helped anyone. After a while, she whispered, voice low and raw. "Thank you." Her fingers gripped the blanket as if she needed a firm object to cling to. Caleb gave one nod. "You ran a long way. Someone chasing you." Like dust caught in a sunset beam, the query hung in the air. After hesitating, she forcefully swallowed. "They won't give up. Not until they finish what they started." Caleb leaned back on the stool beside the cot. He had seen this type of terror before. Time, back when men with weapons responded, just to the extent of their own avarice. He had hidden too many realities ever to mistake this appearance for anything else. What did they start? His voice stayed. Western stories. Quiet, but the tone conveyed the steel of a man who desired the truth and would don't accept anything less. The woman closed. For a brief while, her eyes seemed to gather power. Then she spoke. My name is Lena Carter. My family had a little claim near Silver Mesa. We discovered a seam of ore that was richer than anything we had ever seen. Word got out too quickly. As she went on, Caleb's jaw tightened. Cole Maddox was the one who desired it. He oversees the mining camp as its foreman. He sent his hired guns one night. They claimed that all they wanted to do was speak, but men like them don't come to talk. She drew the blanket closer as her voice broke. They took our claim. Everything was taken by them. I only got away because I fled when they believed I was dead. They want to finish the job so no one knows what they done. Caleb sat there without moving, letting her words settle like dust after a hard journey. He'd seen old West stories greed kill families before, but something in this narrative stung sharper, deeper. Perhaps it was a recollection of his own history. Maybe it was the calm way she spoke, as if every syllable cost more strength than she had left. Outside, a crow called from the fence line. The land was silent, but the silence felt like the breath before a storm. One reality was becoming more apparent with every passing second. Lena Carter was speaking the truth, then problems were already closer than either of them wanted to believe. Caleb stayed on the sitting near Lena for a long moment, letting her story soak into the fissures of that modest cabin. Silver Mesa claim that was stolen. To kill it, men were hired. Fit too cleanly, too flawlessly. The manner. Unpleasant things regularly did when greed was directing the downpour outside the window. The land was vast and silent, but Caleb knows better than to trust silence. With stiff joints from years of labor and painful memories, he carefully stood up and made his way to the door. He pushed it open just enough to see out across the field. Nothing moved save the wind, bending the tall grass. Still, the unease persisted with him. When he turned back, Lena was watching him, her eyes worried and piercing. Do you think they found my trail? Caleb responded with the candor required by the plains. If they want you this bad, they will follow dust itself. He moved across the room, lifted the trap door that was concealed beneath the ancient rug, and pulled it aside. The hinges complained like ancient bones, groaning from lack of usage. He gestured towards the shadowy area beneath. You will be safe down there until I know what is coming. With hesitation, Lena twisted the blanket about herself with her fingers. Her voice trembled. If they come, you cannot face them alone. Caleb gave her a direct gaze that was reminiscent of a Western romance. I have been alone a long time, long enough to know what I can handle. Oh, for a moment she did not move. Then she sucked in a slow breath, gathered her strength, and climbed down the ladder. Caleb dropped the trap door and stretched the rug back into place, then stood still, listening. The cabin settled around him, groaning in the familiar way of ancient wood, but one sound was out of place. Hoofbeats are steady, far away, and first faint. Caleb went to the window and looked out at the distant ridge. From behind a low hill, four cyclists appeared. Their silhouettes made deliberate movements. Men hired to track and finish a job. Males who want no witnesses. As their horses tossed their heads, the riders slowed down close to the fence line and stared at the ground. One rider dismounted and knelt low, inspecting the dirt. Caleb understood exactly what he was looking for. Tracks, blood. Any indication of it. A wounded woman is attempting to avoid death. The rider stood again and gestured towards the cabin. Even at a distance, Caleb felt the shift in the air. That moment, when violence recognizes its destination. He came out onto the porch, rifle held loose but ready. The boards under his boots gave a cautionary sigh. With a voice as harsh as dry whiskey, the lead rider yelled, "We are chasing a thief, a liar, a trespasser." This is where she ran. "We just want to ask a few questions," Caleb answered without blinking. There are no tourists on this land. You will not find what you're looking for. The riders exchanged glances, their horses fidgeting beneath the blazing sun. Tension moved between them like a rattler sliding through underbrush. Because everything hinged on what transpired next, Caleb felt the weight of the moment land on his shoulders. And the riders had already decided they were not leaving without exploring his territory. The riders drew closer, their horses snorted in clouds of dust as they stopped just a few yards from Caleb's porch. The lead man sat straight in the saddle, hands loose near his holster, eyes keen with the assurance of someone who has hurt enough people to feel he would never pay for any of it. Caleb felt his jaw tighten, but he maintained his stance relaxed. The weapon balanced softly in his hands. The man cried out again, "We will search your barn and your shed. It will only take a minute." Caleb nodded slowly to him. A man can make his own decisions in a free land, but you should consider your options carefully before entering an area where you are not wanted. The motorcyclists exchanged gaze. The kind of looks men share immediately before trouble sharpens. One of them clicked his tongue and guided his horse forward. Another followed, moving towards the barn. The third dismounted and began examining the earth at the fence line. Caleb observed him intently. Tracking was an art, and that man moved like an artist. The lead rider stayed where he was, staring at Caleb as if attempting to peel away every secret with nothing more. Then his gaze when he smirked. "A quiet life out here. Strange that you would not notice someone passing through." Caleb answered with the calm of a man who had spent years choosing silence over business. "I notice what I need to observe." The rider abruptly raised his hand while examining the soil. Caleb sensed the change in the atmosphere. The man knelt again. He used his fingertips to brush the dirt before pointing directly at the cabin door. "New, light, and tiny footprints. Not your boots. This morning, someone arrived." The lead rider smiled, but it was the kind of smile that comes from malice. "Seems you have company after all." Caleb did not move. His heart continued to beat steadily, just as it had long since learned to do so when survival relied on it. Inside the cabin, he pictured Lena holding her breath in the darkness under the floor. He prayed that the trapdoor would endure. He hoped her dread would stay quiet. The lead rider swung off from his horse and headed towards the port. The brittle grass beneath his boots was crushed. He took slow, deliberate steps, as if he wanted Caleb to hear every move he made. He placed his palm lightly on his revolver when he got to the bottom of the stairs. Men who rest their hands like that rarely rest long. Caleb raised his rifle just a little, not enough to start a fight, but enough to demonstrate the line in the dirt had been drawn. With a head turn, the rider whispered, "We are going inside." Before Caleb could answer, a piercing crack echoed from the cabin behind him. A floorboard, just one, just enough. The cyclist squinted. He had also heard it. In that instant, the peaceful morning shifted into something hungry and dangerous, and Caleb Thorne understood that the first shot was coming shortly. The floorboard had hardly finished echoing when the lead rider went for his pistol. Caleb was the first to move, not quickly like young men, but quickly like experience. The rider was sent backward and into the dust by his rifle's single shot, which prevented him from rising again. The other men reacted instantly. The calm morning was shattered by gunfire that erupted across the landscape. As gunshots tore through wood and sent splinters flying, Caleb ducked behind the porch rail. He worked the lever of his weapon, fired again, then shifted before the next round chipped the post beside his head. A muffled cry from inside the cabin informed him that Lena had heard everything. He hoped she remained low. She was unable to battle for very long due to her wound. This struggle was on him. Behind the water trough, two cyclists sought refuge. One fired in short spurts while remaining close to the barn wall. Caleb counted their shots, counted their footing, counted the shrinking space between life and death. This fight was not what he had wanted. Although he had not wanted anything to change, change had arrived, and he was not the type of man to allow it to control him. With the riders focused on the porch, Caleb slipped off to the side and sprinted toward the stable. Even though his breath was raspy and his legs were burning, he persevered. He discovered a crate of outdated supplies inside the barn, remnants of a mining job he had before life took him in a different direction. He spotted what he needed: a solitary stick of mining explosive wrapped in old paper. He had kept the fuse, which was still functional, for years, telling himself that he ought to discard it eventually. He didn't. With trembling fingers, he lighted the fuse, said a silent prayer, and rolled the explosive across the ground in the direction of the trough where 2 horsemen were concealed. It bounced once, twice, and suddenly the air was ripped apart by a loud roar. Dirt and smoke flew upward as the trough shattered into pieces. One rider lay still as the dust fell. Another was pulling himself away, wounded and ready to flee. The last man near the barn wall stared in shock, then threw down his gun, scrambled onto his horse, and rode hard for the hills. Silence settled steadily across the property, a silence that carried weight. Caleb walked back towards the cabin, rifle still hot in his grip. Pale and shaking but still alive, Lena pushed open the door. She gazed at the bodies, then at him. Her voice broke. "Is it finished?" Caleb gave a nod. "For now, but truth has a way of finding sunshine. At first light, they will be held accountable for their actions at Silver Mesa." Caleb grabbed his cap and put on his boots. Lena watched him from the crib, anxiety back in her. "Where are you going?" "To the closest town. Somebody has to speak for your family." She clenched her fingers around the edge of the blanket. Her voice trembled. "Please don't do that. They will return for us both if they are aware that I am still alive." Caleb stared at her. His decision weighed heavily but steadily. "They are already approaching. These days, the distinction is whether they appear as men or as shadows. The law is waiting for." Caleb saddled his horse and rode to the nearest town, carrying the truth on his shoulders and Lena's words in his mind. Days later, representatives from the county arrived. Lena shared her tale. They paid attention. The law finally paid attention this time, allowing the earth to breathe once more. Caleb fixed his fence in the evenings as Lena sat on the porch, the healing sun on her face. Now the silence felt odd. Not empty, not lonely, just honest. He had been in hiding from the world for 12 years. But one stranger collapsing at his fence had reminded him of something vital. A man is not supposed to bear his history like a chain. Sometimes he has to break it. He occasionally needs to get back up. The path home can occasionally be the most difficult. Here's an idea for you. When life sends someone to your door who needs your courage, will you step back or walk forward? If this story stayed with you even a little, give it a like. You wouldn't believe how much it helps. Please feel free to subscribe and follow the following story if you'd want to take additional trips around the Old West.